For more on this, we can now cross to Beirut and speak to Adam Barron, visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Hello, thank you very much indeed for your time. Now, there have been calls for a ceasefire in Yemen, but instead, Hodeida is now experiencing some of the worst violence yet in this conflict. Why is the Saudi-led coalition trying so hard right now to wrestle control of Hodeida?
I guess there's two answers to that question. There's, on the one hand, the shorter term one and the longer term one. In the short term, when we hear ceasefire, we may think, the war's coming to an end. But I think for a lot of the combatants, when they hear ceasefire, it's kind of this urge to get things in, to maximize gains, to maximize potential negotiating positions, things like that. On the second end, there's the question, why is Hodeida important? In some sense, Hodeida may be the most important prize as sort of in play in the moment in the war in Yemen. Hodeida is one of the most important ports. It's one of the biggest sources of income for the Houthis, in addition, of course, to being the place where most of the humanitarian aid is going into Yemen and the home of 600,000 shell-shocked and increasingly impoverished civilians. But I think for the Saudi-led coalition, and we're speaking here of the Saudis and the Emiratis, there's a huge concern over having the Houthis maintain any access to the Red Sea. In their sort of strategic thinking, this is something that they view as a potential national security threat. So the idea from their end, and contacts that are familiar with coalition thinking that I've spoken to, basically frame it as they want the Houthis out of Hodeida, whether that's through negotiations or through conflict. And now it would seem, based on the fact that you have this dramatic escalation in fighting, that they've drawn the conclusion that the Houthis will not be engaging in talks in good faith.
I was going to ask you about that because, of course, as well as calls for a ceasefire, efforts are underway for peace talks to happen. The Houthis, though, don't have a record of compromise. So what would need to happen for them to come to the negotiating table?
I think, to be honest, you have a situation where both of the key, broadly speaking, combatant sides here still think that there's things to be gained by continuing to fight. For the coalition, they see the Houthis as weakening. They feel that they can make more battlefield gains and reach a situation where the Houthis are much less emboldened when they enter any sort of negotiations. For the Houthis, they feel that they can continue to drag out the fighting, that eventually international pressure related to, I guess you can say, widespread dismay over the humanitarian disaster unfolding in the country. They think that eventually that will lead key international parties to basically increase their pressure on the Saudi-led coalition to end the conflict. So what you're really saying is it's almost sort of a high-stakes game of chicken. And unfortunately, you have 24 million impoverished Yemenis who don't know where their next meal is coming, caught in the middle of all of this.
Now, Washington's role in the war has been criticised, and not just by aid groups, also by lawmakers, some Republicans even. And at the weekend, Washington announced that it was ending refueling support. What's the significance of this?
I think it remains to be seen. From my understanding, that's just kind of one element that's come actually at the request of the Saudi-led coalition, because they're saying that they're now capable of doing this on their own, that they don't need the U.S. help. That being said, now that you have the Democrats in control of the House of Representatives, you're already seeing certain moves from the potential incoming House leadership in terms of looking at the Saudi role, the U.S. role in the war in Yemen, as a way of pressuring the Trump administration regarding their relationship with Saudi Arabia. So there is a potential, for increasing internal U.S. pressure over the coming period, though it remains a bit too early to really make any definitive predictions.
But aside from the U.S., I mean, generally speaking, there hasn't really been all that much pressure on the Saudis when they're leading a coalition responsible for a lot of civilian deaths. They, of course, say that they never mean to target civilians.
And I mean, absolutely. This is a conflict that I think a lot of key international stakeholders would be assumed would be over the course of a few weeks. Now we look and it's entering, the Saudi military intervention in Yemen started in March 2015. The Houthis took over Sana'a in September 2014. This is something that increasingly appears like it's at risk of becoming an open-ended conflict. And this is something that has potentially destabilizing effects, not just for Yemen, but for the region and both sides of the Red Sea, both sides of Bab el-Mandeb as a whole. So this is something that is certainly a potential topic of international concern. I think that's why you're seeing this bigger push. Particularly, you've had Jeremy Hunt, the foreign secretary, engaging in quite a bit of shuttle diplomacy just over the past 24 hours. But it remains to be seen how far this can go. The fact of the matter is you can have all the international pressure in the world, but as long as the internal Yemeni parties continue to see it in their interest in terms of continuing the conflict, it's really hard to see a way out.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed for your time and your analysis. Adam Barron joining us there from Beirut.